And the This is the second program designed to explore the fate of language in America, especially as it is used in journalism. We have two guests renowned for their mastery of the English language. One of them, John Simon, notwithstanding that English is not his native language. Mr. Simon is the famous film and drama critic whose weekly essays on the English language were for years carried in the New York Times. James Jackson Kilpatrick. Esquire, sorry. James Jackson Kilpatrick is the syndicated columnist and author of The Writer's Art. It is only fair to acknowledge that Mr. Kilpatrick, in a recent essay, criticized my book, The Right Word, because of its, quote, uncontrollable desire to employ words that are familiar to him but are unfamiliar to the rest of the human race. Of course, that's not true, but we should let our guest make his case. After he is through mauling me, I'll give a different view of the role of language in opinion journalism, and Mr. Simon can then weigh in and in his distinctive, authoritative way tell us who's right and who's wrong. Mr. Kilpatrick.
Oh, well, I think we're all right in a way. The point I tried to make is that the function of language, first of all, is to communicate. To communicate an idea from my mind to your mind. That's the first function. After that, we want to entertain, to amuse, to educate. We can do all kinds of things. But we must communicate. We communicate in different vocabularies because we communicate to different audiences. This is what I've argued with you about over the years. What audience are we trying to reach? In my column, I'm trying to reach high school graduates in their most intelligent moments. And I pick a vocabulary that I believe is aimed to communicate with these readers. Now, when I'm writing for National Review, I can be pretty high-flown because I assume that an audience out there is going to be familiar with words that are unfamiliar to my putative high school graduates. So I'm communicating, but I'm communicating in a different tone, in a different vocabulary. And my fight with you is that you communicate in the same high-flown vocabulary all the time. Don't you ever communicate down by the high school graduates?
I remember reading somewhere, Yeats wrote a letter to the Dublin Times in the late 30s, and it said, the question has been raised, what has the Lord Mayor done to commend himself to the people of Dublin recently? I want to ask the question, what have the people of Dublin done to commend themselves to the Lord Mayor recently? It seems to me that, you know,
That
say...
is an elitist comment.
No, look,
Bill.
let's take the world of music, okay?
Yes.
Thelonious Monk. He had a little nightclub here. Anybody want to go, but Thelonious Monk could feel the liberty to express himself musically. So did Duke Ellington. So did Gershwin, all of whom set certain musical patterns which in their day were heterodox. Now, I want to know why, if John Simon writes on a piece of opinion journalism in the Esquire or New York Times or wherever, he can't feel the liberty to use a word that he thinks exactly expresses the intonation he wants to communicate. That's the suggestion that he can't do that is the suggestion that the Lord Mayor has always to oblige the people going the other way.
He is perfectly at liberty to use the perfect word, but will it be understood by his readers?
Well,
or does that matter?
Well, if the readers continue to read his column, it's because they find it worthwhile. Now, as I said, in fact, you even quoted it. If you can give a lot of time to the comic strips and to sports writers who often use a very distinctive vocabulary, why can't you make a little corner for Addison and Steele?
Well, I agree with you entirely. I wish
you don't.
managing
No, you
editors and publishers felt that way.
No, but
Publishers are a very difficult breed.
You're very censorious on the subject. Let me ask Mr. Simon this. Oughtn't a newspaper editor to say, okay, there's a lot going on in this newspaper. Everything, sports, music, ballet, hard news, Newt.
High school.
I'm going to give everybody what he wants. But if that person wants to find in an opinion column expressive thoughts using words that are interesting and useful, why would you think this is a violation of the mandate, or would you?
Yeah. Well, you see, the sad thing about our state of culture is that whereas every damn majority is slavishly catered to, minority, did I say majority? I meant minority, is slavishly catered to. There's one minority that is shoved under the carpet, that's ignored, that's hidden from view, and that is in no way catered to, and that's the intellectual minority. And we are just as much a minority as the rest of them, and I think we deserve some attention, if not as much as the know-nothings, if not as much as the barbarians, at least a little bit of attention, but we don't get it. And I think you're perfectly right in using any word that you want to, if you use it in the right spirit. The objectionable thing is using a big word gloatingly.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
ostentatiously.
for the sheer hell of it, to show what a terrific guy you are.
Yeah.
And that is felt by any halfway
Oh, you can
decent-
tell in a minute.
Yeah. If you use the so-called big word because you really feel and know and believe and that this is the right, the mot juste, this is the right word, nothing else has quite the overtones and the undertones.
But
that
as
are-
often as not, it's not a big word.
Yeah, sometimes it is
Sometimes
a
it's
very
a short
small
word, one or two
Anglo-Saxon
syllables.
word. There are
Right.
lots of semi-obscure Anglo-Saxon monosyllables of 4 letters, not the kind of 4-letter word, you know, that the other guy. And those are very obscure too, and yet those are very exact too.
Ophios, heuristic.
If you read a poet like Seamus Heaney, for example, this wonderful Irish poet, he must know 200 synonyms for thatch. I only know thatch or peat. He must have 1,000 synonyms for peat, P-E-A-T. And it's wonderful, but they're totally obscure words. And they're not polysyllabic, they're not Greek or Latin or whatever, but they're difficult words. And yet, in another sense, to the Irish there in the bog country, they're very simple.
Well, what purpose is served by using word number 552 as a substitute for peat?
Well, because it's a different kind of peat. You see,
Who understands this besides the writer?
the person who takes the trouble to look it up in the dictionary. And that is a person we have the right to expect to exist.
This is really an ego trip by the writer. I have used this one little narrow word because it pleases me.
No, because it's right.
Yeah, exactly.
It pleases me because it's right.
Because the word comes to your mind, and you feel it is a neglect of your knowledge of that word to suppress it. Let me remind you this. Every word that exists because there was what the economists called a felt need for it, i.e., it got into the dictionary because enough people thought that that word accomplishes something that no other word quite does. Yeah. And now to simply take a pledge to neglect those words, it seems to me, is to defy your patrimony and refuse to exploit the pleasures and distinctiveness of it.
My brother, Buckley, I love big words, unfamiliar words, just as you do, and the temptation is irresistible. I stumbled by accident.
Well, it's not irresistible because you resist it.
No, I
claim
don't.
You do.
Oh, I don't. I was looking in the in section of the dictionary once and stumbled over nemiety and fell in love with it. Nemiety. I mean, it has a nice sound on the tongue.
I don't know what it means. Nemiety? No.
I'm astonished. It means a surplusage and excess, a plethora.
Excessive plethora. God, that is an unusual word. Yeah.
Namiety. Lovely word. I'm so tempted to use it every now and then. I mean, there's a namiety of what? Insincerity in Washington. There's a namiety of this. We live in a world of excesses. But I'm not going to use that word in my column.
Why was it invented?
I have no idea, or even who invented it, or where it came from.
Well, you find
I
out.
found it in the in section of the dictionary. I didn't look up the etymology. It's just it was
No,
a beautiful word.
Then you're the person who doesn't look things up, and we're against you. But
Oh, I look them up constantly all day long.
Seriously, your argument resembles, I think, the argument that a painter should not use a palette of hundreds and hundreds of colors.
That's
Or a
different
musician,
thing.
of course.
If he's going to paint a
Different thing,
painting,
Harold.
he should be like Gainsborough with his blue boy. He should take blue and maybe a few varieties of blue, and he has a painting.
Your
God
analogy doesn't
forbid
work.
that if he wants to do pink, he should say,
No.
do I want
Otherwise,
shocking...
he's elitist.
Yeah. Do I want shocking pink? Do I want madder? Do I want rose pink? He should have all of them and use them as he sees fit.
You're back to the cat debate that we had
No,
a
I'm
week
talking
ago.
about painters.
Yeah,
Cats
you-
don't paint.
Apropos of the major moment we got, Evelyn Waugh wrote a letter to the London Times a few years after the Latin Mass was all but abolished by the Catholic Church. And there was a movement to permit one Latin Mass in London once every Sunday. And the letter went, it is alleged that the Latin Mass is only for the educated few. But surely Mother Church in all her charity can make a little room even for the educated few. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it is an abuse of people who don't understand these words, but I'm saying it's an abuse of people who are interested in them to feel that you can't use them. But
My brother, for the uneducated few, there was always a missal in the pew that gave it in English as well as Latin. So you didn't have to know the Latin. You could enjoy the Latin, but you could read it in
Yeah.
English. We communicated that way.
nobody opposes
Well,
that.
wait. What is the difference between picking up a missal and picking up a dictionary? They're both books. They both have to be picked up. They both have to be checked out, and then you know the answer.
I don't see any.
In other words,
you've lost me.
No, I'm saying, why not have the Latin Mass with the missal there? Why not have the difficult words with the dictionary there?
That's
Well,
fine.
you can't run a dictionary in a newspaper that has your column.
No.
But now you're rather
I'm perfectly agreeable.
savage review.
Oh, well, what?
Which is
Savage
one-
was affectionate.
But you simply say, look, this is a violation of basic journalistic mandates. Now, I picked up yesterday Time magazine, and in one page, I found Sprack, Kiliad, Zarathustra, Discontinuous, Rallentando, Times Odometer, and Wooden Mitre Box. Now, why does Time magazine has it not learned your lesson about its obligations to its readers?
I think it is not.
Because you would not have permitted that language to have...
I would have made an editorial judgment that some of those words were probably not communicative to 90% of our Time magazine.
You're
readers.
right. What about the 10%?
Well, you can get along with a 10%.
Also, what would you substitute for Zarathustra? Zoroaster? There is no other way of... No, but seriously, I write my columns in this sort of nice, middle-of-the-road publication called New York. I'm not speaking about the other one, which is august and where everybody knows every word. But in New York Magazine, I do this column, and I get letters, or people come up to me in the street, and they say, look, I don't agree with your views most of the time, but I'm grateful to you for using words that I don't know, that oblige me to look them up, and that teach me something new.
But don't you get just as many letters from readers who are saying, I just can't follow you, Mr. Simon, because I keep having to run to a dictionary you used to me.
Yes, that is true, just as many. But if we have a world in which 50% are idiots and 50% are smart, that's a wonderful world. I will settle for 50% anytime.
Well, I think that's a severe way of putting it, but I would say this. Can you imagine a moment in which Franz Liszt writing one of his etudes or his rhapsodies, would say, I mustn't use a C augmented 11th with a raised ninth because it hasn't been used before, and it will shock people. Shakespeare used 28,000 words. 40% of them used only once. Now, my point is, why should newspapers object to that little corner of their journal in which it is possible to run into an unusual word, but one, the recognition of which and the liberation of the knowledge of which will bring pleasure to 10% of the readers.
And Jim, I said, you see how un-elitist Bill is?
Yeah.
He said 40% of them used only once. He could have said 40% of them hapax legomena, which means exactly the same thing. And he knows that word, but he didn't use it.
But he didn't use it. But I wouldn't have understood it. Or,
no, I'd have used it if I thought there was some reason to use it.
let me try to respond to your question you posed there. Publishers have a limited amount of space in the news hall. They have to buy features that will appeal to a substantial number of readers. The space is finite. Now, a great many readers of the newspaper are going to like Dagwood, or they're going to like this comic strip or the sports pages or something. This minority, say maybe 10% of the readers of a typical metropolitan newspaper, would appreciate good writing or talk about writing. And shouldn't publishers provide space for them? I wish they did, but I can't put any mandate on them to appeal to so small a fraction of their circulation.
In my magazine, we run one page which is an acrostic, a puzzle. We did one of those reader surveys. 10% of our readers do it. We once thought, well, let's eliminate it. The roof fell in. People who wanted that acrostic wanted it more than life itself. Now, it seems to me that to accost a journal in which all of its writers were forbidden to use words that James Jackson Kilpatrick thinks are too unusual, would be to invite them to chew on pabulum that would absolutely drive them fruity with dissatisfaction over the long period.
Now you're going to an extreme. There's a difference between pabulum and, come on.
Oh, but look, I mean, another thing here that's interesting is, this happened to me with the New York Review of Books. The one time they asked me to write something, and they said only 10% of the readers would understand this, which was nonsense, but that's what they said. My answer was, all right, so the others can skip my piece and read the 99 other pieces in the same issue. And likewise in a newspaper or a magazine or anywhere. Let's say that Bill Buckley writes a comment that only 10% can fully enjoy and fully esteem. All right, so then the other 90% have lots of other stuff that they can read, and I'm sure Bill will manage without those 90%.
Well, as I said in my affectionate, not hostile review of your book, I wish you communicated at a little lower on it, because you got a lot to say. And a great many people who might benefit from your erudition and knowledge and experience are squeezed out.
Well, you quoted, by the way, this book is not just about unusual words.
No, it's not.
But you quoted, you quote me now. I wrote, the point about unusual words is that they are as necessary to philosophy, economics, aesthetics, and political science as they are necessary in the world of higher mechanics. It is possible, I suppose, to describe the refinements of an astrojet fan injection through ventilated engine in words understandable to me, but the exercise is not often resorted to because the manufacturers assume a level of mechanical literacy, even as they assume that those who do not have it ought not to set the standards for those who do have it. How do you handle that?
Oh, now you're into technical writing is one thing. I mean, I mentioned earlier, vocabularies are separate.
That can apply to Shakespeare, technical writing. It's not just automobile engines about which there's technical writing.
There's a lot of
philosophy, psychology, psychoanalysis, even politics has technical writing.
Of course.
But you don't object to
you can't describe a fan jet engine, I suppose, as anything but a fan jet engine. There is no way of getting
I don't
down
know
from the
what fanget
vocabulary.
is. I don't know what it is.
Don't have any idea.
You don't know, I bet.
I have none.
I don't know about a fan jet engine specifically, but there have always been people, I mean, let's say Carl Sagan, who can take something like astronomy and make it accessible to people.
Right.
And
Which is
maybe
good,
fan,
which is
maybe,
good.
yeah,
Now he's
yeah,
making
and
my
maybe
argument.
fan jet engine can be too. But making something accessible to people does not necessarily mean avoiding the difficult word. So that the person who will make fan jet engine accessible will not avoid that word. He will use it and then explain it. He will first use a simpler way of putting it and then say, and this is what is known as a fan jet engine. So you do both.
You have a lot of fun, as the New York Times or that guy in North Carolina, because I use the word heuristic. Now, heuristic means a very complicated legal strategy. They're the kind of thing that O.J. Simpson's lawyers used. Now, I don't know another word for heuristic. So do you simply...
Complicated?
It's not necessarily complicated.
But you just said it was.
No, well, it's also complicated, but it's also highly digressive, builds on false premises.
I don't think so.
Complicated doesn't handle the word heuristic.
But if your readers don't know what heuristic means to begin with, how have you improved their understanding by saying the strategy was heuristic?
Well, sometimes they get it from context, and sometimes they look it up. But if they do look it up, can't they find it very useful in terms of enlarging their understanding of what words developed in order to cope and describe with certain situations? You were saying, John?
I hate to disagree with you because I think basically we're very much on the same side of the fence. But I don't think that's what heuristic means. It means disputational or legalese language. It does not necessarily mean all that complicated or all that
I'm not
questionable. But anyway, heuristic is a wonderful word, and if I have a chance to use it, I'll always use it.
So if it's apposite,
yeah.
if it's apposite, you object to Cartesian. Why should you object to Cartesian? I mean, Descartes introduced a formal means of knowledge and describing knowledge, which was an epical event. Why should you be so unhappy about
Because
that?
so few of my readers, I write for daily newspapers, 220 daily newspapers. I would not guess that 1% of my potential putative readers have any comprehension of Cartesian, what Cartesian means.
But that can easily be looked up. Look, in my review that's coming out on Monday, I say about a musical, I said, this is essentially a cartoon. No point becoming Cartesian about its logic.
Why impose
The cartoon and Cartesian
Because
creates
it's
a wonderful...
nice, it's fun to
It
hear
creates a
that.
wonderful euphony,
Yeah.
a homophony, an anaphora, whatever you want to call it. And
I wouldn't have called it an anaphora.
well, it's using the same initial syllable.
You list analog as an objectionable word. Can you imagine? You say avatar. How can you get through the day without using avatar?
I can get through any day without saying avatar. Any day.
He must have a CD collection that does not have any analog recordings in it.
Yeah, and here we are talking about this super literate guy who's written these and who writes a column on how to write. I do honestly think that you really ought to publicly repent your position here. You should encourage journalists who are not simply engaged in, if you were bitten by a rattlesnake, here's what to do.
All right.
If you have that, don't get it confused. Don't use long words about how to treat yourself for a rattlesnake bite. But if you're not talking about something that instrumentally bound, you should feel free to express yourself.
If I'm talking about politics, government, something, you write for the 10%, and I'll write for the 90.
Well,
Is that a
that's-
bargain?
Well, in the first place, it's not that neat.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
The
things are
90%
that
mingle in the 10%.
Yeah,
10%
sure,
mingle
there's
in
a certain
the
overlap.
But anyway, when you recant, be sure not to say mea culpa, because they won't understand what you say.
Well, I'm not, I mean, here I quoted words from Time magazine, and Time magazine has 4.5 million subscribers. If they were convinced that it was really offensive to use the word Kiliad or Zarathustra or rallentando or discontinuity, then presumably the Kilpatrick mandate would move in and they would forbid it. I think it would make time less interesting than it now is.
Well, these are editorial judgments. We make them every day of the world, those of us who write for a living and especially write for newspapers.
I'm not saying you don't have the authority to do it. I'm saying that somebody as bright as you shouldn't make those criticisms.
I'm not dumbing down. I'm trying to communicate in language that that my readers, I hope, will understand. If I'm not doing that, I'm a failure as a writer.
I'm afraid I'm with Bill. I agree with the musical analog. Must you compose only in the diatonic scale and not use chromaticism? If the means are there to expand, to do something bigger, to do something more ecumenical, and I do say that difficult words are ecumenical, because if, and there is a hope, if you can get people to look them up, then knowledge, then education spreads. And in that sense, the big word is part of a very useful ecumenism that the small world is not, because it just caters to the same old restrained, limited diet, the pap.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Thank you, Mr. Kilpatrick, ladies and gentlemen.
Next week on Firing Line, in part 1 of Should Affirmative Action Be Terminated, host William F. Buckley Jr. talks with University of Texas law professor Lino Graglia, United Nations Watch Chairman Morris Abram, Bard College President Leon Botstein, University of Pennsylvania law professor Lonnie Guinier, and Women's Legal Defense Fund President Judith Lichtman. This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support was provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line. For information